number 34 says, what are the solutions of x squared minus 2x minus 3 equals 0? Well, when we have a quadratic like this, there's a few ways we can solve it. We can graph it, we can factor it, we can use square roots, but only if there's not a middle term, so that's not going to work here. Or we can use the quadratic formula. And for all of them, the equation needs to be equal to 0, which this one already is, so that's awesome. If I think about my options, so I have graphing, quadratic formula, or factoring. Factoring seems like the most simple option at this time. So I'm going to try and factor it and see if I can do that. So I have x squared minus 2x minus 3 is equal to 0, and I'm going to see if I can come up with two sets that would multiply back to this. Well, in front I have x squared, so I know that my front numbers need to be x and x. I also know that my last numbers need to multiply to 3, so I definitely need to have a 3 and a 1. But one of them has to be negative so that I get a negative 3. So it must have to be x minus 3 and x plus 1, because my middle term is negative 2, and the only way to add up to negative 2 would be to have a negative 3 and a positive 1. And you can multiply this back out, FOIL it back out, and make sure that you get the original. That means you've factored it correctly. Now, we also know that these two things have to be equal to 0. So when I have two things getting multiplied that equals 0, to find out what one of them is, one of them has to be 0, otherwise the answer can't be 0. So if the answer is 0, which is what it says, one of these has to be 0. So to make this part equal to 0, x would have to be equal to 3. And to make this part equal to 0, x would have to be equal to negative 1. So it looks like my two answers are 3 and negative 1, which is C.